They're not yours to take. Ketra's voice was a blade, sharp and cutting through the tense silence of the command deck. She stood at the helm, her carapace glinting under the cold blue light of the ship's control panels. The crew froze, their usual hum of activity reduced to stifled breaths and nervous glances. Across from her, Vael recoiled, his segmented arms twitching as if seeking escape from her piercing gaze. What would you do if the unthinkable happened? Stay tuned to uncover the chilling consequences of this alien act of desperation. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment with your thoughts. This is a story you won't want to miss. The room was heavy with the faint hum of the ship's engines, a sound that usually provided comfort in its constancy. Tonight, it felt like a countdown. Vael tried to stand taller, his antennae flicking with forced confidence, but even he couldn't mask the tremor in his voice. We needed leverage, he said. A way to make them listen. Leverage? Ketra's mandibles clicked with restrained fury. You took their children, Vael. You didn't just cross a line. You obliterated it. Vael's compound eyes darted to the others for support, but no one spoke. No one dared. The weight of the revelation was too much, even for the hardened crew of the Luminex Ascendant. Ketra stepped closer, and the sharp edges of her shadow loomed over him. Do you know what you've done? She demanded. Her voice lowered, the anger now tempered with something worse. Fear. They'll come for us. Not with negotiations, but with fire. You've unleashed something we cannot contain. Vael didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was already written across the faces of the crew. Deep in the ship's hull, faint cries echoed. The sound was barely perceptible over the ambient noise of the vessel, but Ketra heard it. She stiffened, her antennae rising. Her worst fear confirmed. The humans' children were here, vulnerable and terrified, aboard her ship. For the first time in her long and storied career, Ketra faltered. The enormity of the situation settled over her like a suffocating weight. A mistake of this magnitude could doom them all, not just as crew, but their entire species. Her mind raced, searching for a solution. Could they return the children unnoticed? No. Too late for that. Humanity would already know they were gone. Could they release them on some neutral ground, hoping the humans would see it as an olive branch? Unlikely. She knew humans too well. They were protective, territorial, and above all, relentless when it came to their young. The comm panel buzzed, a communication from the surface. Ketra's heart sank as she recognized the caller ID. Terra Defense Command. The humans knew. Ketra turned to her crew, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Prepare for incoming transmission. I'll handle this. Vael looked ready to protest, but one glare from Ketra silenced him. She pressed the panel, and a human face filled the screen. It was a woman, her expression a volatile mix of fury and grief. Her uniform marked her as a high-ranking officer, but it was her eyes that held Ketra's attention. They burned with a mother's rage, a force that could outmatch any weapon. This is General Adrian Cole of the Terra Defense Command, the woman said. You have taken what is most precious to us. Return them. Now. Ketra forced herself to remain calm. General Cole, this is Captain Ketra of the Luminex Ascendant. There's been a grave misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Cole interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. We tracked your ship from the abduction site. There is no misunderstanding. You have our children. Ketra hesitated, searching for the right words. We do not condone this act. It was unauthorized. Save it, Cole snapped. You have one chance to fix this. If those children are not returned within the hour, we will consider it an act of war. The transmission cut off. Ketra stood in silence, her claws curling into fists. She turned back to her crew, her mind already racing through the limited options. We're out of time, she said. Prepare the children for return. We'll find a way to make this right. And if they attack us before we can, one of the crew asked. Ketra's gaze hardened. Then we'll do what we've always done. We survive. But even as she spoke, She couldn't shake the feeling that survival might not be an option this time. Humanity's wrath was coming for them, and Ketra wasn't sure even she could stop it. The silence in the command deck was suffocating. Ketra stood motionless, her talons gripping the edge of the console so hard it began to groan under the strain. Her mind raced. Time was slipping away faster than she could calculate, and every scenario ended in catastrophe. Vael's voice broke the silence, trembling with a mix of defiance and desperation. We still have options. We could negotiate. Negotiate? Ketra rounded on him, her iridescent carapace catching the cold light of the panels. You think they'll listen to words after what you've done? Humans don't bargain when it comes to their young. They destroy. Vael recoiled, his antennae drooping. The rest of the crew exchanged uneasy glances, their usual confidence in their captain overshadowed by the reality of the situation. Ketra took a steadying breath. Fear was a poison, and right now, it was spreading fast. We will not panic, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. We will act. From the back of the room, a younger crew member, Liana, hesitantly stepped forward. Her claws clicked nervously against the floor. Captain, the children, they're unharmed. If we return them, perhaps it would de-escalate the situation. Ketra turned to her, considering. How? Do you propose we drop them off in the middle of a battlefield and hope for the best? The humans are already mobilizing. A poorly executed attempt will only make things worse. Before Liana could respond, the ship's AI chimed in, its voice calm and emotionless. Captain, long-range sensors have detected multiple vessels entering our sector. Trajectories confirm they are of human origin. Estimated time to intercept: 25 minutes. The weight of the AI's report settled over the room like a death knell. 25 minutes. Not nearly enough time to make amends, but just enough time to prepare for annihilation. Ketra's mind raced as she surveyed her crew. These were seasoned operatives, trained to face unimaginable odds, but she saw the cracks forming in their resolve. They had never faced a force like humanity, not enraged, not with their blood boiling for vengeance. What if we surrendered? Liana offered, her voice soft but clear. The room erupted in protests. Surrender to humans, one of the navigators snapped. They'll tear us apart. They're already going to do that, Liana countered, her eyes flashing with rare defiance. Maybe if we show them we mean no harm. No harm. Vael interrupted, his voice rising. We've taken their offspring. To them, that's the ultimate harm. They won't stop until we're dust. Enough. Ketra's voice silenced the room. She stepped forward, her presence commanding. Liana has a point. Surrender may be the only way to show them we aren't their enemy. Vael scoffed, his mandibles clicking. And if they execute us anyway? Ketra's gaze hardened. Then we face our fate with honor. But we will not die as cowards hiding behind stolen children. The room fell silent. Ketra turned to the AI. Open a direct channel to the lead human vessel. Channel open, the AI confirmed. Ketra stepped forward, her hearts pounding in unison. The screen flickered, and a human officer appeared, their face grim and resolute. This is Captain Ketra of the Luminex Ascendant, she began. We seek to return the children immediately. The officer cut her off, his voice cold as steel. And prepare to be boarded. Ketra hesitated, every instinct screaming to push back, to fight for her crew. But she knew resistance would doom them all. Understood, she said finally. We will comply. The officer's eyes narrowed. You have 15 minutes. The transmission ended, leaving the deck in stunned silence. Ketra turned back to her crew. Prepare the children, she ordered. We'll meet them in the docking bay. What if they don't honor the agreement? Liana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ketra looked at her, the weight of leadership bearing down on her shoulders. Then we'll face what's coming. Together, as the crew dispersed, the cries of the children echoed faintly through the ship's corridors. Ketra's resolve hardened. She didn't know if humanity's fury could be appeased, but she would try. Because failure wasn't just the death of her crew, it was the death of her species. Ketra stood in the dimly lit corridor outside the containment bay, listening to the muffled sounds of children sobbing on the other side of the sealed doors. It was a sound she couldn't ignore, no matter how much she tried to focus. The weight of the situation pressed against her, each cry a reminder of her crew's colossal mistake, and of the ticking clock. The crew moved with grim efficiency, preparing the docking bay for the human boarding party. The air was thick with tension, their usual confidence eroded by the knowledge of what awaited them. Even Vael, usually the most vocal, worked in silence, his posture slouched under the burden of his guilt. "Captain," Liana's voice broke through Ketra's thoughts, tentative but resolute. "The children, what if they refuse to leave with us alive?" Ketra turned to her, her mandibles tight with determination. "That's not a risk we can eliminate, but it's a risk we must take. These children's lives are worth more than our fear." Liana hesitated. "What about the humans? They might use this as an excuse to wipe us out, even if we return the children." Ketra's gaze softened, though the fire in her voice remained. If they wanted annihilation, they wouldn't need an excuse. They'd already have destroyed us. This act is our only chance to show them we're not the monsters Vael's actions have painted us to be. The young crew member nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. In the containment bay, the children huddled together, their wide, tear-filled eyes reflecting the cold light of the alien ship. Ketra entered, moving slowly to avoid startling them, though her towering, insectoid frame must have looked terrifying to their fragile forms. She knelt down to their level, making her movements deliberate and calm. "We are taking you home," she said, her voice as soft as she could manage. "You are safe now." The children didn't respond, but their crying quieted, replaced by wary silence. Ketra couldn't blame them for their mistrust. To them, she and her crew were the enemy, the monsters who had ripped them from their homes. Behind her, Vael stood awkwardly, his claws fidgeting. "They're scared," he muttered. "Of course they're scared," Ketra snapped, her patience fraying. "They were abducted by strangers and imprisoned in a foreign ship. They have every right to be terrified." Vael flinched but said nothing. Ketra sighed, forcing herself to calm down. She needed to keep the crew unified, especially now. "Escort them to the docking bay," she instructed, gently, "and make sure they're warm." Vael nodded and gestured to the other crew members to assist. The children were guided out of the containment bay, their small forms dwarfed by the towering aliens around them. Ketra followed closely, her eyes scanning the corridor for any sign of trouble. The docking bay loomed ahead, its massive doors slowly opening to reveal the shimmering void of space beyond. The human ships were now visible through the energy barrier, their sleek designs bristling with weaponry. Ketra's heart pounded as she stepped forward, positioning herself between the children and the waiting docking platform. A voice crackled over the comm system. "This is Commander Reed of the TDC Resolute. We are initiating the boarding process. Hold your positions." Ketra signaled her crew to remain still, their postures tense but compliant. The air shimmered as the humans' boarding craft extended a pressurized walkway, locking onto the docking port with a resounding clank. The hatch opened, and armed human soldiers poured out, their weapons raised but not yet firing. Ketra raised her claws slowly, a universal gesture of surrender. "I am Captain Ketra," she said, her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. "We are returning your children unharmed. Please accept this as a gesture of goodwill." A tall human stepped forward, his face partially obscured by a helmet. He glanced at the children, who clung to each other in fear, then back at Ketra. "Unharmed, maybe," he said, his tone cold, "but traumatized all the same." Ketra nodded. "I understand. What was done to them was wrong, and I take full responsibility for the actions of my crew. I ask only for the chance to make amends." The human commander studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he gestured to his soldiers. "Secure the children. Watch them closely." As the soldiers gently guided the children toward the docking craft, Ketra felt a glimmer of hope, but it was short-lived. "This doesn't absolve you," Commander Reed said, his voice sharp. "You'll answer for this. All of you." Ketra inclined her head, accepting the judgment. "Do what you must. But I implore you, let us speak with your leaders. Let us show you we are not your enemies." Reed didn't reply. Instead, he signaled his soldiers to keep moving. Ketra remained motionless, her crew silent behind her, as the humans filed back into their craft with the children in tow. As the docking port sealed shut, Ketra knew this was far from over. The humans had their children back, but the fury in their eyes spoke of retribution still to come. And she wasn't sure her crew or her species could survive it. The silence left behind by the humans' departure was deafening. Ketra stood motionless in the docking bay, her claws clenched tightly at her sides. The faint vibrations of the departing human craft echoed through the ship, growing fainter with every second. For a brief moment, relief threatened to wash over her. The children were safe. That much, at least, was accomplished. But the relief was short-lived. Her antennae twitched as the cold reality settled in. This was not a resolution. It was merely the opening act of what was sure to be a brutal reprisal. "Captain," Vael said, breaking the silence, his voice heavy with worry. "Do you think they'll let us go now?" Ketra turned to him, her expression unreadable. You saw the look in their eyes. "Do you think mercy is on their minds?" Liana stepped forward, her smaller frame dwarfed by the tension in the room. "They have their children back. Isn't that what they wanted? We acted in good faith." "Good faith?" Ketra's mandibles clicked audibly as she took a step toward the younger crew member. "Do you think they'll see it that way? We abducted their young and held them captive. Returning them doesn't erase that. To them, this isn't justice. It's a temporary appeasement." The crew fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. The ship's AI interrupted, its calm tone starkly at odds with the rising tension. "Captain, the human fleet remains in close proximity. Scans indicate that additional ships are arriving in the sector." Ketra's claws tightened. More ships meant more firepower, more determination. They weren't retreating. They were consolidating. "Prepare the ship for a defensive posture," she ordered, her voice sharp. "But do not arm the weapon systems. If they see us as hostile, they'll attack without hesitation." Vael frowned. "You think they're not already planning that?" Ketra's gaze snapped to him, her tone icy. "If they wanted us dead, we would already be floating in debris. The fact that we're still here means they're debating their next move. We need to ensure that move isn't annihilation." The crew dispersed reluctantly, moving to their stations. The air was thick with unspoken fear and doubt, but Ketra refused to let it consume her. She couldn't afford weakness, not now, not when the stakes were this high. In the control room, she stared at the growing cluster of human ships on the tactical display. It was a formidable fleet, each vessel armed to the teeth and radiating menace. Ketra's antennae twitched as she watched their formations shift, calculating trajectories and possible strategies. "Captain," Liana said quietly, stepping up beside her, "if they're consolidating, doesn't that mean they're preparing for something larger? Maybe we should reach out again. Try to open another channel before they make their move." Ketra considered the suggestion, her mind racing. Communication could be their only chance to stave off disaster, but it was also a gamble. Any sign of perceived weakness could embolden the humans further. "Do it," she said finally, her voice steady. "Open a channel to their flagship." The AI complied, and moments later, the screen flickered to life. Commander Reed's face appeared, his expression as grim and unyielding as before. "Captain Ketra," he said, his tone cold, "I was wondering how long it would take before you called again." Ketra stepped forward, her mandibles tight with resolve. "Commander, I know you have no reason to trust us, but I need you to understand, we never intended to harm those children. Their abduction was a grievous mistake, one I intend to rectify to the fullest extent possible." Reed's eyes narrowed. And yet, here we are. You talk of mistakes, but what I see is a calculated violation of every standard of decency. Tell me, Captain, why should I believe a word you say? Ketra met his gaze unflinchingly. Because if I wanted to harm your kind, I would not have returned them. I would not be speaking to you now. I know words are insufficient, but actions matter. And my actions today have been to save lives, not take them. Reed studied her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment neither spoke, the silence charged with tension. You'll have your chance to explain, he said finally. But not to me. My orders are to detain your vessel and bring you back to Earth for formal proceedings. Resist, and we'll consider it an act of war. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Ketra staring at the blank screen. Vael's voice broke the silence. Earth? They're taking us to their homeworld. It appears so, Ketra said, her voice distant. Liana's eyes widened. Captain, if we go to Earth, there's no guarantee we'll ever leave. They'll detain us, or worse. Ketra nodded slowly, her mind racing. She had hoped for a dialogue, a chance to explain and de-escalate the situation. Instead, they were being taken deeper into enemy territory, where their fates would be decided by a species that saw them as little more than monsters. This isn't over, she said, her voice firm despite the unease gnawing at her. If they want to take us to Earth, we'll go. But we'll make them see the truth. We are not their enemies. We are not monsters. Her words hung in the air, a fragile hope against the storm brewing on the horizon. The crew moved swiftly, though each step felt heavier than the last. Ketra's orders were concise. Her eyes focused on the tactical display as she analyzed the human fleet's movements. They were not just surrounding the Luminex Ascendant. They were corralling it, forcing her into a tight corner with no apparent escape. The realization that their journey was now heading toward Earth, toward human judgment, settled uneasily in her stomach. Captain, Vael said, his voice quiet as he approached from behind. We can't outrun them, can we? Ketra shook her head, her antennae twitching. No, even if we had the resources to try, we wouldn't make it far. Their fleet is too vast. We're doomed then, Vael murmured, his voice trembling. Do not speak of defeat, Vael, she snapped, turning to face him. Doom is a state of mind. We are not done yet. Liana entered the control room, her eyes wide with concern. Captain, we're receiving a message from their fleet. They're requesting to board our vessel again. This time, it's their entire command team. Ketra felt her heart's race, her mind already working to calculate the best course of action. If the humans were coming aboard, it meant they were serious about their plan to bring her to Earth. But they hadn't made a move to destroy her ship yet, and that alone was a strange, fragile sliver of hope. Prepare the ship for their boarding party, Ketra ordered. This time, we'll meet them in person, face to face, and we'll see if they truly seek to understand. Vael shot her a worried look. And if they decide we're a threat again, then we'll defend ourselves, Vael, she said firmly. We won't go down without showing them we're not their enemy. But we must not appear aggressive. We have to make them see reason, even if that means offering more than just words. She knew, deep down, that this was a gamble. But the alternative, surrendering without a fight, was unthinkable. They had already made their mistakes. The worst thing now was to allow their pride and fear to cost them everything. The docking bay doors hissed open, and the human fleet shuttlecraft glided into the Luminex Ascendant's bay with mechanical precision. The hiss of airlock seals and the deep hum of energy fields filled the tense silence of the room. Ketra stood at the threshold, flanked by her crew, as the human delegation stepped onto their ship. At the front of the human team stood Commander Reed, his expression cold and calculating. He didn't look at her with the disdain she'd expected, though the skepticism in his eyes was unmistakable. Behind him, the other officers moved with the same military precision, their hands resting near their weapons, ready for anything. Ketra stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. Commander Reed, I am Captain Ketra of the Luminex Ascendant. I ask again, allow us to speak with your leaders. Let us explain our actions. Reed's gaze swept over her, his eyes lingering on the crew behind her. He studied each of them in turn, as if looking for any sign of rebellion. But he said nothing for a long moment. You've made your request, he said finally, his voice still clipped, but your actions have already spoken for you. The Federation isn't interested in your explanation. The words hit like a blow, but Ketra didn't flinch. She had expected nothing less. Then what do you want from us, Commander? Are you here to take us to Earth in chains, to lock us away and forget we ever existed? Reed's gaze softened, just for a moment. If it were up to me, he said quietly, we'd never have to make this choice. But it's not. I'm following orders. And right now, those orders are to bring you to Earth for judgment. Judgment, the word hung between them, as final and as cruel as the void itself. Ketra's thoughts whirled, but she held her ground. There are no excuses for what was done, she said, her voice steady. But there are explanations, and there is hope. Please hear us out. Let us show you who we truly are, and not just what you think we are. Reed stared at her for a long, tense moment, his fingers tapping lightly on the hilt of his weapon. Then, to her surprise, he stepped back. We'll be taking you to Earth. But don't think for a second that we're doing this to hear you out. This is protocol. You will answer for your actions, and your crew will answer as well. Ketra's stomach tightened. And if we refuse? If you refuse, Reed replied coolly, you will be destroyed. This is your final warning. Make your choice. The word sent a chill down her spine, but Ketra knew what needed to be done. There was no room for pride now, only survival. She turned to her crew, nodding once to signal them to comply. Prepare for transport, she said, her voice firm. We will go with them, and we will show them that we are not their enemies. Not anymore. The crew began to move into position, some of them still wary, others resigned. Ketra's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. The outcome was uncertain. The humans might still destroy them, or they might imprison them forever. But there was still a chance, just a small chance, that by the time they reached Earth, the humans would see that the Luminex Ascendant wasn't a symbol of destruction. It was a symbol of change. As they prepared to board the human shuttle, Ketra looked back at her ship one last time. She had led them this far, but where they were going, she didn't know. The only certainty was that whatever happened next, she would face it head-on, for her crew, for her people, and for the hope that one day, the fear and mistrust between their two species might finally be overcome. The journey through space was silent, oppressive in its stillness. The human shuttlecraft, smaller and sleeker than the Luminex Ascendant, was surprisingly well-equipped for the task of transporting prisoners, if that's what they were, or what they would become. Ketra sat in the front, flanked by her crew, their faces tense and uncertain. The walls of the shuttle, white and sterile, did little to calm the growing anxiety. The hum of engines and the occasional beeping of the ship's systems were the only sounds breaking the heavy silence. Ketra's thoughts raced, her mind working through every possible outcome. She had to remain calm. She had to keep her crew together. She had to keep them alive. But the images of Earth, of human cities, of the faces they would encounter on their arrival, haunted her. What kind of judgment awaited them? How would the humans treat them? The window beside her gave only a vague view of the stars, a blur of white lights that seemed to pass by too quickly. Ketra's antennae twitched involuntarily, scanning for something, anything, that might give her a clue about what was coming next. But all she could do was wait. How long until we reach Earth? Vael asked, his voice quiet and tight with unease. Long enough for them to decide what to do with us, Ketra replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. Liana, always more optimistic, spoke up from the back. We've been through worse, right? We survived their attacks. We'll survive this. Ketra didn't reply immediately. The truth was, she didn't know if they would survive. They had made it this far, but that didn't guarantee anything. The humans were angry. And when humans were angry, their decisions were often swift and merciless. After a long pause, Reed's voice crackled over the intercom, his words clipped and authoritative. We'll be entering Earth's orbit in approximately 3 hours. Prepare yourselves for transfer to our central facilities. Ketra's heart skipped a beat. Earth. The words sounded foreign, even terrifying to her now. It had once been a place of myths, stories shared by the few who had managed to leave the planet before the fall of the Great Empire. Now, it was a destination, a reckoning. She glanced at Vael, who returned her gaze with a mixture of fear and resolve. Liana's face was pale, but she nodded silently. They knew what had to be done. Whatever Earth had in store for them, they would face it together. Hours passed in the uncomfortable silence of the shuttle. Every passing minute felt like a lifetime. Ketra couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded toward some final confrontation, a place where the line between survival and annihilation would be drawn. Her thoughts were interrupted when the shuttle lurched slightly, signaling their arrival in Earth's orbit. The view through the small window shifted, and Ketra's breath caught in her throat. The planet below was beautiful, beautiful in a way she had never expected. The swirling blue oceans, the vast green continents, the clouds hanging like delicate wisps of smoke against the pale blue sky. It was a world that felt vibrant, alive, and yet, as they descended toward the human capital, Ketra couldn't shake the feeling that the beauty of the planet was just an illusion that would soon shatter. Brace yourselves. Reed's voice came through again. We're entering the atmosphere now. Expect turbulence. The shuttle dipped sharply and the crew tensed. The ship rattled against the turbulence as it punched through the upper atmosphere. A violent jolt sending a brief wave of nausea through Ketra. She steadied herself, focusing on the steady rise of the ship's engines and the sounds of her crew struggling to hold their composure. They had faced far worse than this. But this was different. As the shuttle broke through the last layer of atmosphere and leveled out, Ketra saw it. Earth, in all its splendor and dread. The capital city stretched across the land like a living organism, a sprawling metropolis of glass, steel, and concrete. Buildings soared into the sky, their gleaming surfaces reflecting the sun's rays. She could almost feel the pulse of humanity, the heartbeat of a planet teeming with life and tension. The world was in the grip of something unknown, something dangerous. We're nearing the docking bay, Reed announced, his tone clipped but firm. Remain seated. The transfer will be quick. Ketra nodded, her gaze fixed on the rapidly approaching city below. The shuttle began its descent toward the vast structure at the heart of the capital, a gleaming complex that stood as a symbol of the humans' power. The ship touched down smoothly, the docking bay doors sliding open with an eerie hiss. A wave of cold air rushed into the shuttle, sending a shiver down Ketra's spine. The human officers were already moving toward the exit, their weapons ready, their expressions unreadable. Ketra stood slowly, motioning for her crew to follow her. The air felt heavy, thick with the unknown. As they stepped out of the shuttle and into the vast, sterile docking bay, she was immediately aware of the armed guards surrounding them. The humans hadn't taken any chances. Follow my lead, Ketra whispered to her crew. Do not resist. They moved forward in tight formation, their eyes scanning every corner of the room. The metallic scent of the docking bay mixed with the sterile, chemical smell of the human environment. A human officer, tall and imposing, approached them, his expression cold. Captain Ketra, he said, his voice low and formal. You and your crew are to come with me. You will be taken to the central facility for processing. Ketra nodded, forcing herself to maintain a calm demeanor. The tension in the room was palpable, but there was nothing she could do but follow. This was the moment they had feared. The judgment was upon them. But what kind of judgment awaited them on Earth? Would the humans see them as they truly were, an oppressed species, driven to desperate measures? Or would they be viewed as nothing more than invaders, criminals in need of punishment? The officer motioned for them to move forward, and Ketra led her crew down the long, sterile hallway, toward the unknown fate that awaited them. The halls of the facility were far more intimidating up close. The walls, all stark white and featureless, gave the impression of an endless maze, stretching forward in every direction. As they walked, Ketra's crew was kept under close surveillance, human guards flanking them at every step, weapons at the ready. The air felt dense, stifling, as though the very walls were designed to isolate them, to make them feel small, insignificant. Ketra's heart pounded, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. They had to stay calm. If they showed weakness now, it could mean their end. The mission to Earth had been meant for understanding, for communication. There had to be something more than this waiting for them, something that would offer a glimmer of hope. Her thoughts were interrupted as they reached the end of the long hallway. A massive door slid open, revealing a spacious chamber. In the center of the room sat a table, surrounded by high-ranking humans in dark uniforms. They all stood as the crew entered, their eyes trained on the Luminex Ascendant members, unreadable expressions on their faces. Among them, Ketra noticed a figure who seemed to stand apart. Taller than the rest, his posture commanding. His uniform marked him as a higher authority. Ketra's antennae twitched slightly. She wasn't sure whether to trust the look of caution or curiosity that the human's leader wore. "Captain Ketra," the leader said, his voice firm, but not without a hint of something else. "Please have a seat. We've been expecting you." Ketra hesitated for only a moment before she moved to the table, her crew following behind. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her. This was the moment they'd been dreading. The moment when all of their actions, all of their choices, would be judged by the humans. But she couldn't let fear control her now. She had to fight for their survival. The leader took a step forward and extended his hand toward her. Ketra didn't reach for it immediately, unsure of the meaning behind the gesture. "This is Commander Flynn." One of the officers beside him spoke up. "He's the one in charge here." "Captain Ketra," Flynn said, his voice softer now. "We've reviewed your ship's records, your communications. We know what happened, but we need to hear it from you." The words hung in the air, and Ketra's crew shifted uncomfortably. She knew what this meant. It wasn't just about the children. It was about everything, their entire journey to Earth. The decision to come here, to negotiate, to make contact with humanity in the first place. There was no way to explain it all, to make them understand, not without taking responsibility for what they had done. She inhaled deeply, meeting Flynn's gaze without hesitation. "I cannot deny what we did," she said, her voice steady, but heavy with the weight of her own guilt. "But there were no easy choices. We had no other options. The empire we once served, our people, are dying. We didn't know where to turn. I made a decision. I did what I thought was best for those children. They were at risk, and I wanted to protect them." Flynn's eyes narrowed slightly, his face unreadable as he processed her words. His hand remained outstretched, waiting for her response. But there was no immediate anger, no shouts of condemnation, just silence. "We are not your enemies," Ketra continued, her voice growing stronger, more resolute. "I know you see us as invaders. I understand why you might feel that way. But we are not here to harm you. We never were. I came because I thought we could build something new, something better. But I don't expect you to believe that right away." Flynn finally lowered his hand, clasping it behind his back. "You're right. We don't trust you. Not yet." There was a long pause. The room felt charged, each of them waiting for the other to make the next move. "We've been reviewing your species' history," Flynn said after a moment, his tone thoughtful. "You've been through a lot. It's clear that you've lost your way. But that doesn't mean your story ends here." The words took Ketra by surprise. She had expected judgment, condemnation. But this was something different. Flynn wasn't speaking to her as an enemy. He was speaking to her as if they were still capable of negotiating, of finding a way forward. "But it's not just about the children," Flynn continued, his voice growing sharper. You've crossed a line. You've stolen from us. You've invaded our space without warning, without any form of contact or consent. This wasn't just about survival. It was an act of aggression, and you need to understand the consequences of that. Ketra's breath caught in her throat. The consequences. She had known there would be repercussions, but hearing them spoken aloud in such a cold and calculated manner made the gravity of their situation all the more real. And the children? Liana spoke up, her voice trembling. What about them? You think they're just going to be forgotten? Flynn's gaze shifted toward Liana, his expression hardening. They are not forgotten, but they are not our responsibility either. You took them. They were your choice, your mistake. Now you'll answer for it. Ketra's mind raced. She had known there would be no easy answers. The humans were right to demand accountability. But how could she make them see? How could she convince them that their actions had been born of desperation, not malice? Please, she said, her voice softened now. The children, they need protection. We didn't bring them here for anything other than that. They need a safe place to grow. If you can't forgive us, can you at least offer them sanctuary? Flynn paused, his eyes studying her, his jaw tightening as if wrestling with a decision that could determine everything. Finally, he spoke. That's something we can consider, he said. But first, we need to know, who are you now? What are you, Captain Ketra? What is it that you want for your people? Ketra took a breath, the weight of his question settling deep in her chest. There was only one thing she could say. We want to live, and we want to rebuild. We want a future. The room fell silent again, the weight of that simple declaration hanging heavily between them. Would the humans understand? Would they give them a chance to prove themselves? Flynn nodded slowly. That's a start. Ketra felt a glimmer of hope, though she knew it was fragile. The words she had spoken weren't a promise of safety, only an opening, and Flynn, despite his stern exterior, had offered them something in return, the possibility of a future, a chance to make amends. But it was only a chance, nothing more. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut through, each individual contemplating the weight of what had just transpired. It wasn't a clear path forward, not by a long shot, but it was a start. Flynn turned his attention to his officers, signaling them to step forward. A human officer, younger and with an anxious look in his eyes, approached the table with a small data pad. He handed it to Flynn, who reviewed the information quickly. The officer, standing at attention, said nothing, but Ketra could see the brief flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Captain Ketra, Flynn said, his voice firm once more, we're not in the business of forgiving easily. What your people have done is serious. But, as I said, there's potential here. If we are to move forward, we'll need to see action. Action? Ketra repeated, her brow furrowed. Flynn's gaze sharpened. We need proof that you are not just a remnant of a lost empire. We need to know that you can build something new, that you can contribute to the future, not just take from it. You will help us with something. Ketra felt her pulse quicken. She had no idea what this something could be, but she knew that refusal was not an option. What do you need from us? Flynn's lips curled into something like a smile, though it lacked any warmth. There are others, alien factions, who have been moving in and out of human space recently. They have their own agendas, and we've caught wind of something big, something dangerous. If you want to prove that your people can change, help us with this. Help us stop whatever is coming. If you do that, you'll show us that you're more than just survivors. You'll show us that you're allies. The words hit Ketra like a blast of cold air. Her mind raced. Helping the humans? After everything that had happened, after their invasion, their kidnapping of the children, their desperate escape from a dying empire? The idea of working alongside these same humans felt almost surreal. Yet she knew it was their only way forward. We'll do it, Ketra said before she could second-guess herself. It wasn't a decision she took lightly, but it was the only decision that made sense. Good. Flynn responded, his voice turning colder. "We'll be watching, every step of the way. Fail, and you'll be more than just outcasts. You'll be enemies." There was no room for missteps now. The path Ketra had chosen was lined with peril, and the stakes were higher than ever. She turned to her crew, meeting their gazes one by one. The weight of their shared responsibility was heavy on all of them. Liana, ever the optimist, managed a small nod, her expression uncertain but hopeful. Vael, on the other hand, wore a frown, his jaw tight. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath, but Ketra could see the fire in his eyes. He wasn't ready to give up, not yet. Reed, who had been eerily silent throughout the entire exchange, spoke up now. "Do you think we can trust them?" Ketra paused, her eyes lingering on Flynn as he motioned to one of his officers to begin preparing the next phase of their briefing. "I don't know," she admitted, "but we don't have a choice." They were led to another room, smaller than the last, but just as sterile. A projector flickered to life, casting a map of the solar system onto the wall. The image was crisp, detailed, showing Earth's orbit in the center with numerous ships and satellites scattered across the area. "This is where things get complicated," Flynn said as he pointed to a cluster of dots on the map. "These are ships from factions that we don't fully understand. We know they've been in human space recently, and they're showing up in places where they don't belong." Ketra leaned in closer, squinting at the unfamiliar symbols next to the ships. "What do they want?" "We don't know," Flynn said, his voice tense. "That's why we need your help. We've intercepted some communications, encrypted ones, that hint at an alliance forming. Something big is coming, and it's too dangerous for us to deal with alone." The map zoomed in, focusing on a small section of the galaxy. A strange, glowing blue that blinked ominously. "We need you to go there," Flynn said, gesturing toward the dot. "That's the location of the latest signal we intercepted. We believe it's a base of operations, but we're not sure. You'll get in, investigate, and report back. If you can gather intel on these factions, it could mean the difference between victory and catastrophe." Ketra stood still, her heart pounding. She had no idea what awaited them out there, no idea if this mission would even be possible. The humans had just handed her and her crew a task that could easily spell their doom. But they had no choice. This was their chance to prove they were more than what they had been, a fallen empire, struggling for survival. This was their chance to show that they could stand side by side with humanity, fighting for the future. Ketra turned to her crew again, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her gut. "We're going," she said, "for the children, for all of us." They nodded, one by one, understanding the gravity of the situation. As they left the room, ready to prepare for the mission ahead, Ketra couldn't help but feel the weight of everything pressing down on her shoulders. There was no turning back now. The fate of her people, and perhaps humanity, rested in their hands. The journey to the distant signal was not as simple as Ketra had hoped. The Luminex Ascendant crew worked relentlessly, navigating through the void of space toward the coordinates Flynn had provided. Days turned into weeks, and tension continued to grow within the crew. The mission had already changed the dynamics of their small team. The weight of the decision to trust the humans to help them was starting to take a toll. Ketra paced the command deck, eyes focused on the holographic map as it displayed their progress. The quiet hum of the ship's systems was the only sound breaking the silence. The crew was on edge, unsure of what lay ahead. The factions that had shown interest in Earth were unpredictable, and Ketra could feel the growing anxiety in the air. "We're nearing the signal." Liana's voice broke the stillness, and Ketra turned to face her. The younger officer had been the most optimistic, but even she seemed uneasy now. "We need to prepare for anything," Ketra said, her voice low but determined. "We don't know who or what we're dealing with." Vael entered the room, his usual scowl deeper than ever. "The humans didn't tell us everything. They're holding something back. I can feel it." Ketra looked him in the eyes. "Maybe, but we don't have time to question their every move. We need to focus on the mission. We've come this far, and we can't turn back now. Vael crossed his arms. Fine, but don't come complaining when we walk into a trap. The crew was quiet as they made their final approach to the coordinates. As the signal grew stronger, the atmosphere in the ship became heavier, more charged. The unknown had a way of gripping the heart, and Ketra felt it in her chest. Every instinct she had as a captain screamed that they were walking into something dangerous, something far beyond what they had anticipated. As the ship entered the designated sector, they were met with an eerie calm. The stars around them flickered, their light dimming as the signal intensified. Ketra's heart skipped a beat. The strange glowing blue from the map was now directly in front of them, a cluster of small, shadowy structures, barely visible against the backdrop of deep space. What the hell is this? Reed whispered from his station. His voice was thick with disbelief. It's a station or some kind of base, Ketra muttered, squinting at the readout. But it doesn't match anything we've seen before. The station appeared abandoned, yet the signals continued to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, almost as if it were waiting for them. Liana leaned forward. There's something not right about this. It's too quiet. Ketra's gut churned. She knew that feeling. It was the same one she had gotten when she'd first found the children on their dying homeworld. It was the instinct of survival. Something was wrong. Something was about to happen. We're going in, she said, her voice firm. Prepare for possible contact. Weapons at the ready. They docked with the station, the air around them thick with tension. The team geared up, checking their equipment, ensuring their weapons were locked and loaded. This wasn't going to be a peaceful negotiation. Whatever awaited them inside the station was bound to be hostile. The airlock hissed as it opened, revealing a dark, vast interior. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and shadows danced eerily across the floor. The crew moved in formation, their boots echoing in the silence as they made their way deeper into the station's labyrinthine corridors. Suddenly, a deep, rumbling voice echoed through the hallways, making them all freeze in place. You should not have come here. Ketra's breath caught. The voice was like nothing she had ever heard before, deep, almost mechanical, with an undercurrent of malice. It wasn't human. It wasn't alien either. Something far older and more dangerous. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, armored, and glowing with an eerie light. It stood before them like a nightmare made real. Ketra's heart pounded, but her voice didn't falter. Who are you? What do you want? The figure's head tilted slightly, as if amused by the question. We are the Dread, the ones who once controlled this galaxy. And you, Captain Ketra, have made a grave mistake by getting involved. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The Dread? Ketra's mind raced. This was bigger than they had imagined. They weren't dealing with just another faction. This was something ancient, something that had been lurking in the shadows for far longer than they could comprehend. We didn't come for a fight, Ketra said, holding her ground. We came to stop the real threat. The real threat is far beyond your understanding, the figure said, its voice dripping with disdain. You are nothing more than pawns in a much larger game. Before Ketra could respond, the air around them crackled with energy and the Dread figure lunged forward, its glowing hands reaching for them. Get down! Vael shouted and the crew scattered, barely avoiding the strike. The battle was on. The crew fought with everything they had, using their weapons and their wits to keep the Dread at bay. But no matter how hard they fought, the Dread seemed to anticipate their every move, its strength far surpassing anything they had encountered before. The situation was growing desperate. Suddenly, Liana shouted, her voice frantic. The signal! It's coming from the center of the station. We have to stop it. Ketra nodded, her mind already racing. The station wasn't just a base. It was a weapon, a trigger for something much more terrifying. The Dread were trying to unleash something, and they had to stop it before it was too late. We need to get to the core, Ketra ordered, rallying her crew. With the Dread hot on their heels, they made a desperate run toward the heart of the station, dodging blasts and evading the enemy's attacks. The station seemed to close in around them, its walls shifting and pulsating with dark energy. They reached the core, a massive chamber at the center, filled with an intense, glowing energy field. There, in the center of it all, a massive device hummed, its power growing stronger by the second. "This is it," Reed said, his voice tight with fear. "We have to destroy it." Ketra's heart pounded in her chest. They had no time. The Dread were closing in, and the device was almost ready to activate. The crew split up, trying to find a way to deactivate the core, but the Dread were relentless. In a final, desperate effort, Ketra and her crew worked together, pulling wires, overriding systems, and dismantling the core with every ounce of energy they had left. And then, with a deafening crash, the core exploded, its energy rippling through the station in a burst of light. The Dread staggered back, disoriented. Ketra and her crew barely made it out of the chamber before the entire station began to collapse around them. They had done it. They had stopped the threat. As the crew emerged from the wreckage, battered but alive, they looked out at the remains of the station, now nothing more than debris floating in space. The Dread were gone, and the immediate danger had passed. But Ketra knew that their fight wasn't over. There were still enemies out there, more factions, more threats. But for the first time in a long time, Ketra felt a sense of relief. They had survived. They had proven that they could still fight, still win, and maybe, just maybe, there was hope for the future after all. As they boarded the Luminex Ascendant and began their journey back to Earth, Ketra looked at her crew, her heart swelling with pride. They had faced the impossible and come out victorious. It was a new beginning. The Luminex Ascendant hummed with quiet intensity as it drifted away from the remains of the Dread Station. The crew was still recovering from the harrowing battle they'd just endured. Their bodies were exhausted, bruised from the explosions and the unrelenting assault of their enemies. But despite the pain, there was something in the air, an undeniable sense of victory. Ketra stood in front of the large viewport in the ship's observation room, gazing out at the void beyond. The stars were scattered like precious gems, their distant light offering a momentary peace amidst the chaos that had consumed her life for so long. The station was gone now. The device had been destroyed, and with it, the immediate threat of the Dread. But that didn't mean the fight was over. No! There were still unknown enemies out there, lurking in the shadows. But for now, the immediate danger had been neutralized. "Captain," Liana's voice broke through Ketra's thoughts. She turned to face her officer, who had a concerned look on her face. "We're being hailed," Liana said, her hands already hovering over the controls. "It's Flynn." Ketra felt a mix of unease and hope. Flynn, the human captain, had been their reluctant ally throughout this mission. Their uneasy alliance had been forged out of necessity, and though she could never fully trust him, she couldn't deny the gratitude she felt for his guidance. "Put him through," Ketra said, her voice steady. A moment later, Flynn's image flickered onto the screen. His face, though worn and tired, remained stoic. His dark eyes locked onto Ketra's, his gaze as intense as ever. "Captain Ketra," he began, his tone more serious than she had expected. "We've been monitoring the situation. The Dread threat has been neutralized, but we've received reports of a larger fleet of unknown ships heading toward human space. This is just the beginning." Ketra narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean, just the beginning?" Flynn's expression darkened. "These ships aren't the same as what we've dealt with so far. We believe they are part of a coalition, a network of different alien factions that have been operating in the shadows. The Dread were only one piece of a much larger puzzle. If these ships make it to Earth, we're looking at an invasion on a scale humanity has never faced." Ketra felt the weight of his words settle in her chest like a stone. The mission she had just completed had been a success, but now, it seemed, a far greater challenge awaited them. It was like putting out a fire only to find another one smoldering, waiting to erupt. "We'll need every ship we can get," Flynn continued, his voice tight. "And we need you and your crew. We need the knowledge you've gained, the alliances you forged." This isn't just about survival anymore. This is about protecting the future of all of us. Ketra glanced over at her crew, who had gathered quietly behind her. She could see the determination in their eyes, the same fire she had seen when they first set out on this journey. They hadn't come this far to back down now. "We're in," Ketra said, her voice resolute. "We'll help you stop this. We've already proven that we can face the impossible and win." Flynn's lips twitched upward, though it was more of a grim acknowledgement than a smile. "Good. I knew I could count on you." The transmission ended, and the screen flickered back to the quiet hum of the ship's status updates. The crew remained silent for a moment, absorbing the gravity of what had just been said. "We can't afford to wait," Ketra said finally, breaking the silence. "We need to gather intel, assess the situation, and prepare for what's coming. This alliance might be fragile, but we're going to need every advantage we can get." Liana nodded, her face steely with determination. "We'll make it happen, Captain." Ketra looked around at her crew. "We have a long road ahead of us. The fight isn't over." As the Luminex Ascendant shifted into its next phase of readiness, Ketra felt a renewed sense of purpose flood her. They had a mission, a cause that transcended their personal losses, fears, and doubts. They had a chance, not just to survive, but to help shape the future of two worlds. And this time, they wouldn't be standing alone. Ketra stood before the command console, the weight of the universe pressing down on her shoulders. The Luminex Ascendant had entered hyperspace, racing toward Earth at full speed. Her crew, gathered in various sections of the ship, were preparing for what lay ahead. The unknown fleet was still days away, but the tension in the air was palpable. The crew had worked tirelessly since their last communication with Flynn, gathering information from human intelligence, decrypting data from the Dread Station, and preparing for battle. Every member of the crew knew this was their last shot at ensuring humanity's survival. The thought of failure was unbearable. In the briefing room, Ketra stood with Liana, Vael, Reed, and a few key members of the crew. The holographic map on the table displayed the movement of the unknown fleet, a coalition of factions, each as dangerous as the next. The network of ships moved toward Earth, a coordinated force intent on annihilation. It was clear to Ketra that they would have to take the fight directly to them, and they needed to be ready. "We've got one shot at this," Ketra said, her voice steady but intense. "The Dread were just one part of this puzzle, but we've learned enough to know they're not our only problem. These new factions, they're a threat on a scale we can't fully understand yet." Reed, who had been quiet for the duration of the meeting, finally spoke. "So what's the plan, Captain?" Ketra paused, looking around the table at each of her crew members. Her team, her family, had been through so much together, and now, more than ever, she needed their strength. She needed them to believe in what they were about to do. "We strike first," she said. "We disable their ships before they can reach Earth. If we wait, it'll be too late. We take the fight to them, disrupt their fleet's coordination, and hit them where they're most vulnerable." Vael's eyes narrowed. "A direct assault? You think we can take on an entire fleet with just a ship?" Ketra met his gaze with unflinching resolve. "It's not just a ship. We've got allies. Flynn and his fleet will back us up once we've done the heavy lifting. But we need to hit them hard and fast. We can't afford to wait for reinforcements. This is our moment." Liana nodded. "I've been going over their fleet's formations. We can create an opening in their defenses if we time it right. It won't be easy, but it's doable." Ketra exhaled, trying to push the weight of the decision aside. "Then we do it. Prepare the crew. Get everything ready. We leave as soon as we drop out of hyperspace." As the meeting ended, Ketra walked back to the bridge, her mind racing. They were on the precipice of something monumental. They had no illusions about the odds. The fight ahead of them was sure to be fierce, and the outcome uncertain. But there was no turning back. Hours later, the Luminex Ascendant dropped out of hyperspace, its sensors immediately detecting the massive fleet ahead. Ketra's breath hitched. The sight of it, so vast, made her heart skip a beat. Hundreds, no, thousands, of ships loomed in the distance, a dark, foreboding wall of destruction. Her fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair, her pulse quickening. But there was no fear. Not anymore. "Captain," Liana called out from her station. "We've locked onto their lead ship. It's time. The clock is ticking." Ketra stood and turned to face her crew, each of them focused, ready for the fight. "You've all trained for this. We're doing this for the future of our worlds, for every life on Earth, and for those we lost along the way." She paused, locking eyes with each of them. "This is what we were born to do. Let's show them what we're made of." A moment of silence passed, and then, as if in unison, the crew moved. The Luminex Ascendant roared to life, its engines powering up for the final assault. The ship sped toward the fleet, and the first wave of energy blasts shot out from the weapons bays. The enemy fleet reacted immediately, a series of ships breaking off to intercept. Ketra's heart raced as the ship weaved in and out of enemy fire, returning fire with deadly precision. The battle was chaos. Ships exploded in a shower of light and debris, the space around them becoming a violent storm of fire and fury. But Ketra didn't hesitate. She was a leader, and in this moment, the crew depended on her to guide them through the storm. "We've got this," she muttered to herself, gripping the controls tighter. The Luminex Ascendant took several direct hits, but the hull held strong. Liana and the other engineers worked frantically to keep the ship systems operational, even as the damage mounted. Vael's sharp eyes scanned the battlefield, guiding them through the shifting chaos. Reed's calculations were spot on, helping them anticipate enemy moves with near-precise accuracy. The crew was fighting as one, each member playing their part in a deadly dance. As the battle wore on, the momentum began to shift. The enemy's fleet was disorganized, their attacks less coordinated as they struggled to adapt to the unexpected resistance. Flynn's fleet arrived, joining the fray and adding pressure to the attackers. The tide was turning. Ketra felt a surge of adrenaline as the Luminex Ascendant dove through a gap in the enemy's defense, a swift and brutal strike that disabled the lead ship. The shockwave from the explosion sent ripples through the remaining fleet, creating the opening they needed. "This is it," Liana said, her voice shaking but filled with determination. "We've got the advantage now. Finish them off." Ketra didn't hesitate. The crew executed their final maneuvers with precision, taking down the remaining ships one by one, their weapons tearing through shields and hulls with deadly efficiency. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of the enemy ships was destroyed. The fleet that had threatened Earth was no more. The Luminex Ascendant floated in the aftermath, its weapons powered down, its systems still intact though battered. Ketra stood at the helm, her heart racing with the aftermath of the battle. The victory was theirs, but it had come at a cost. The crew was weary, their bodies and spirits worn from the fight, but they had done it. "They'll never forget this," Vael said quietly, his gaze fixed on the debris that filled space. "No," Ketra replied, her voice low. "They won't." She took a moment to look at her crew, her family, and felt a profound sense of pride. They had faced the impossible, and they had emerged victorious. This battle was over, but their work was far from done. The galaxy was a vast and unpredictable place, filled with dangers both known and unknown. But for the first time in a long time, Ketra allowed herself to believe that there was hope. Together, they could face whatever came next. And as the Luminex Ascendant sailed back toward Earth, the crew knew their fight had just begun. But no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together,